Hello and welcome back to another chat with me, Curious G. So I know last time I said, next week we're going to be cracking open Snapchat and looking at what its filters are doing to our identity. But as I was doing the research, I ran into a few little snaggles, so I'm going to put that topic on the shelf for now. Instead, I'll be tackling a completely different and much more substantial topic today. Let's jump in with the story, shall we? When I was in my undergraduate program at the University of Colorado, I had one of the absolute strangest history classes I've ever had in my entire life. I remember that on the first day of class, the professor put an image up on the screen of what appeared to be a modern American living room that had remained untouched for thousands of years. There was a skeleton sitting in a lounge chair, a television, and some modern snacks that both you and I would recognize today. My professor then pretended to be an archaeologist from the year 4000 and stated that the scene that we were looking at was actually the ritualistic space of the ancient man. She described the chair the skeleton was sitting on as the high throne, and the snacks were foods used in ritualistic ceremonies. She went on like this for some time, but then all of a sudden she changed into a professor of philosophy and stated, "This is why we can't believe someone when they say they have truth. It's all a matter of perspective. There's no such thing as objective truth." At the end of the class, she stood near the door and continued to reiterate why objective truth couldn't be as the students exited the auditorium. Now, to be fair, I do understand that my professor was trying to teach us a valuable lesson, that being to always view historical accounts with a critical eye and never believing anything at face value just because someone else said it. But then she went a step farther and stated that there was no objective truth at all. As original as she may have believed her philosophy to be, her position actually isn't a unique one. In fact, it's one of the most popular ways of thinking in our society today. It flies under the banner of postmodernism. What's that, you ask? Well, simply put, it's a philosophy that doesn't believe in objective truth or judgment statements for that matter. They instead believe that truth can only be equated with perspective and believe that it's actually a social construct. Oh hey, for those of you that don't know what a social construct is, it refers to something that's not natural but is instead created by society. For example, government or even education. Okay, now back to what I was saying before. Now, as I mentioned before, postmodern thought is actually one of the predominant ways of thinking around the world. And believe it or not, I can understand why it is. It not only provides the freedom for each individual to choose for themselves what is truth, but it also protects from argumentation around that viewpoint. For the remainder of the semester, my professor continued to weave in the postmodern notion of truth throughout the rest of her lessons. One of the prominent ways that she did this was by hammering home the social construct theory that we just discussed. She would frequently do this by chastising Western culture and their forceful historical crusades. She would say, "We have no right to tell others what's right and wrong because universal truth does not exist. We each construct our own version of truth and we should be okay with others' version of it as well." Now, I'm about to say something that will make my professor and potentially some of you very upset. She's wrong. Whether you like it or not, there are absolute truths that exist. Don't believe me? Well, let's start with the laws of nature, like gravity. If you jump from a high place, which I'm not advocating for at all, don't go jumping from high places, you will fall. The truth of the law of gravity did not have to be created by culture. It's something that's naturally inherent to life on Earth itself. I mean, denying gravity would be even more absurd than believing that the Earth is flat. Speaking of which, why do you think so many in the scientific community are so bothered by flat earthers? Because it is objectively not true. Now, natural laws are one thing, but what happens when we begin to say that there are universal truths inside the human experience? Impossible! Not exactly. Let's look at grief. When anyone loses something or someone that's important to them, they grieve. Now, how we grieve is undoubtedly influenced by cultural and societal factors, but the experience itself is universal. Therefore, we can make the statement, everyone grieves regardless of culture. Now, I could go on and on and on, but I'll go ahead and stop and say that I realize that these examples are somewhat benign. Things become exponentially more complicated when we start to deal with truth statements that try to move an idea forward. Statements such as God exists or McDonald's fries are the best in the world. Even so, my goal here was simply to prove to you that there are objective truths that supersede cultural and societal constructs. If you choose to deny this, you choose to deny reality. And if you choose to deny reality, then you are what we in the psychological field call delusional. Now, no one wants to be labeled delusional, and I'm sure my professor wouldn't like it either. I imagine that if she heard my statement, she would adamantly formulate an argument as to why she should not be labeled as delusional and continue to say that my viewpoint was probably bigoted and closed-minded. I've never been told that before. But consider this. If her view on truth was correct, how then would she be able to defend herself or even say that I'm wrong in the first place? The truth of the matter is, she couldn't. Why not, you say? Well, let's unpack this. She made the claim that there is no such thing as absolute truth, but what she probably didn't realize was that statement in and of itself was a truth claim. Since she's so readily able to deny absolute truth, then the truth claim that she made can't be true either. Let me give you an example to break it down a little bit more, because this gets a little funky when you try and really put it in concrete terms. Imagine this. Someone comes up to you and says, unicorns don't exist. Gasp, no! But then in their very next statement they say, my unicorn is better than your unicorn. Why would we be arguing about unicorns if you stated that they didn't exist in the first place? The same goes for truth. Why would we be arguing about truth if you said it doesn't exist in the first place? It's logically incoherent. But it gets worse. I've actually heard postmodernists fight back against this argument by saying, logically coherent reality doesn't exist, nor is it necessary. No! 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 Thankfully, other people have been able to respond more graciously than I. For example, I was recently listening to a philosopher give a talk on coherent reality at a university in the United States. In the middle of his talk, a student stood up and shouted, "Whoever told you life needed to be coherent? Is this another one of those Western things you're trying to dominate us with?" The philosopher then responded, "I'll answer your question, but I ask that you answer mine first. Would you like my response to your question to be coherent or incoherent?" The student responded in silence. In looking at this scenario, the way in which the question was asked reflects the arrogance of postmodernism, while the inability to respond demonstrates the hollowness of the philosophy itself. So if this way of thinking is so flawed, why is it so popular in our society today? Well, I think it has to do with the fact that Western ideology has been so prominent of a way of thinking over the last century. Unfortunately, this way of thinking has been imposed on other cultures through physical occupation and through economics. I believe many people became tired with Western thinking and currently are looking for a new way of thinking that is less restrictive and more freeing. Believe it or not, I can sympathize with the desire to throw off old shackles and find new freedoms. And I'll even go a step farther and say that I believe the roots of postmodernism sought to respect and embrace others' differences. But the pendulum shift was so strong that it sent the whole thing flying off its axis. Postmodernists overstepped their boundaries, not just by denying truth, but then by mandating that no one else believe in it either. Perhaps you may be thinking I'm embellishing this a little too much, but my experience and the experience of others in universities around the world would say otherwise. Now, the other reason I believe it's become so popular is because it's so mindless. There is literally nothing to defend in this position because there's nothing to posit in the first place. It appeals to our laziness, yet it is enticing to us because it also appeals to our entertain me culture. We love shocking tabloid philosophy that gives the headlines of "Everything you ever learned is wrong." We become so fixated on these headlines that we actually forget to read the article and see why they're saying that in the first place. Thus, we dangerously relegate ourselves to the position of believing something without knowing why we believe it in the first place. Look alive, people! Our minds are being bombarded with nonsense and half of us don't even realize it's happening. Okay, I'll stop there for now, but I want to hear from you. I understand that this video may be somewhat upsetting for some of you because it does go against what our popular culture says we should believe. But what we've looked at is the postmodern thought that my professor was propagating doesn't have any substance to it. Since it denies absolute truth, then itself cannot make the truth claim that there is no absolute truth. And according to the law of non-contradiction, a statement can't both be true and untrue. Thus, the thesis that postmodern philosophy posits isn't true. Now, like always, this isn't the end of this conversation. I'm not sure if I'm going to continue it in my next video or if I'm going to wait till a later time to do it, but for now, we'll just leave it at that. Again, like I stated, go ahead and leave your comments below and let's discuss this further. And as always, if you liked this video or found it informational, would you consider liking, subscribing, and hitting that little notification button? These conversations are going to continue to roll on, and we'd love to have you join us for the ride. Alright, my people, that's all I've got for today. But until next week, keep thinking.